Chère audience, bonsoir. Je suis Borky Bergman, directeur du Centre de Design de l'UQAM et professeur à l'École de Design. Ce soir, j'ai le plaisir d'introduire la conférence du collectif RVTR, et ce dans le cadre de l'exposition qui a ouvert hier soir au Centre de Design, Infra-écologie urbanisme. Cette conférence a été rendue possible grâce au soutien de l'École de Design et nous en remercions son directeur Maurice Cloutier. Fondé en 2007, le collectif de recherche-création, un terme qui est très utilisé à l'UQAM, qui ne peut pas être mieux manifesté que dans les activités de RTVR. Donc, RVTR œuvre aux différentes échelle de la culture matérielle, allant de l'étude de l'enveloppe du bâtiment jusqu'au concept méga-régionaux. RVTR est constitué de 3 architectes associés à Ann Arbor et à Toronto, Colin Ripley, Geoffrey Thune et Kathy Velikov. Colin Ripley est formé d'abord comme ingénieur à l'université McMaster, en sciences physiques à l'Université de Toronto et en maîtrise d'architecture de l'Université Princeton. Geoffrey Thune détient un diplôme en sociologie de l'Université Western, en sciences de l'environnement et en architecture de l'Université de Waterloo et une maîtrise en design urbain de l'Université de Toronto. Kathy Velikov est formée en sciences de l'environnement et en architecture à l'Université de Waterloo et par la suite en maîtrise de l'histoire de l'art de l'Université de Toronto. Tous les 3 ont commencé leur enseignement à l'Université de Waterloo et aujourd'hui, Colin Ripley est directeur de l'école d'architecture de l'Université de Ryerson à Toronto et Kathy Velikov et Geoffrey Thune sont des professeurs d'architecture à l'Université de Michigan, l'Université d'État de Michigan à Ann Arbor. Le collectif a publié plusieurs textes de leurs propos théoriques et projets dans différentes revues et ouvrages collectifs tels que The Post-Carbon Highway dans Fuel en 2008, Confe Urbanism, Regional Ecologies of Energy and Mobility dans New Geographies en 2009, Confe Urbanism, Retooling, Regional Ecologies and Energy and Mobility dans Infrastructures as Architecture en 2010, et un texte du même nom que cette exposition, Infra-écologie urbanisme dans MONU, numéro 15 en 2011. Et sous presse chez Routledge, aujourd'hui, Responsive Envelopes, Bridging Performance and Control, dans le livre High Performance Residences. RVTR, comme groupe, ont reçu de nombreux prix et distinctions. On peut nommer le prix d'excellence de l'Institut royal de l'architecture du Canada en 2011, le prix de roman en architecture en 2009 et le prix des jeunes architectes de la New York Architectural League en 2008. La conférence sera en 2 parties, prononcée par Geoffrey Thune et Kathy Velikov, et je vous demande de les accueillir chaleureusement.
Thanks very much. This is an unusually dramatic situation. I keep waiting for someone in a kind of illuminated garment to swing from the ceiling in this kind of space between the audience and the front. Thanks, and on behalf of my partners, Kathy and Colin, I'd just like to say how pleased we are to have the opportunity to exhibit our work here at the Centre de Design and to be able to give a public lecture at UQAM. It's been great working with Borcourt, Georges Lebrec and the team at the Centre de Design to develop the exhibition. which I hope, if you've not had an opportunity to see yet, you may be able to see it before it closes on April 14th. I should also say during the course of the week, thank you especially to Philippe Lupien and Cohen de Winter for the opportunity to work with students within the Master of Environmental Design program on a workshop testing some ideas about how to intervene in complex systems, which will be the theme and part of the discussion tonight. As Bourcourt mentioned, RVTR is a research-based practice. What this means is although we're a professionally licensed architectural practice both here and in the US, and we do take on professional or conventional built projects, the majority of our work is not done for clients, but funded through grants from various agencies, both private and public. Hence, the practice has become an experimental research platform from which we can launch new explorations into the future of architecture and urban design. The nature of the studio is an open one, and this is probably a familiar format for many of you who are practicing. We work with a range of relatively talented young graduates and collaborators from across a range of disciplines. Our office is organized horizontally in terms of responsibility and workload, and we work at a single table as a means of keeping the discussion open. But we're also fundamentally involved in testing material and physical models at one-to-one, and although the subject of tonight's discussion will focus on large-scale urban territories, the principles of complex ecology and conceiving of the world of built things in a context of ecological relations that expand beyond the components that appear to be central to the question is a driving force within the work we undertake. And so it's likely that someone would be equally at home undertaking complex renderings or tests of relational fields in a digital format as they would be programming Arduinos, or in some cases suspended uncomfortably while they finish electrical connections. The motivations behind this mode of practice is that we believe we're living in a highly dynamic time. It is a time when many transformations are underway in both practice and the education of architects. We are living in a time when, in the words of philosopher Bruno Latour, every single thing, every detail of our daily existence, from the way we produce food to the way we travel, build cars or houses, clone cows, etc., is to be redesigned. And of course, this is fantastically amplified by the various ecological crises that we currently face. So on the one hand, these questions that require more than piecemeal solutions. As most of you are currently well aware, the architectural discipline has expanded beyond building design, and many architects are engaging in the design of large-scale urban developments, infrastructures, and landscape ecologies. On the screen is an image of a landscape in Iceland, and for us it resonates as it conflates two incredibly powerful aspects of our present time. One is our present consciousness of geological time and process. The fact that the very matter of the earth, of the air, and of the seas is no longer one that we can take for granted, but one that is in active transformation. And Iceland, this sense of the geology and its radical transformation in deep geological time, as well as in incredibly short moments of transformation, is eminent and palpable. We're also aware of the fact that our actions are also creating feedbacks and coevolutions at the geological scale. Second is the geography of energy. In the image are running a series of pipes carrying steam originating from active fissures in the island to the capital of Reykjavik, and whose figure is produced firstly by the logics of optimization relative to terrain, but also the limits of material properties and the necessity for expansion within the horizontal pipes with a particular frequency. The footprint of the city extends beyond the city itself. The production of energy is material, spatial, territorial, and political. Most of it happens in what are referred to as the hinterlands of cities. But we are coming to a point when we can no longer consider these geographies as externalities. And part of our present project is to not only rethinking the energy landscape, but to also imagine how to make it public. Another key image for us that we would draw from this idea of the relationship between the cultural domain and where it interfaces with these landscapes of energy is exemplified in Iceland's Blue Lagoon, an artificial geothermal pool accidentally created as silica-rich water runoff from the adjacent steam power plant accumulated on the stone, forming a seal so that the water would no longer drain through the porous volcanic rock. And over the years, people were attracted to the pools which were beginning to form, at which moment there's an understanding or a realization that the properties of the water itself offer more than bathing, but also remedial or mediating health benefits for those with particular skin conditions. And this idea that the byproducts, this concept of industrial ecology, that the byproducts of particular processes might be reconceptualized and utilized for projective cultural ends is central in much of our work. The concept of leveraging the possibilities of one domain via the seeming byproducts of another is fascinating and is instrumental in the way we approach our work, regardless of its scale, attempting to recognize the overlapping ecologies that surround us and identify means and locations in which to engage these systems. For us, the concept of the house itself begins to engage within a set of deep ecologies that would include fundamentally the way we consider the landscape of energy and its attendant flows, the way we would imagine recalling the ambitions of Charles Eames' conceptualization of the architect and designer within a network of social and cultural concerns that extend way beyond the fact of delivering domesticity. And for us, the kind of idea of how the related systems that we might discuss at relative scales within a contemporary sustainable discussion really can be conceived of a web as interrelated concerns ranging from infrastructural and economic concerns right to the space of the domestic and the production of familial life. It also calls into questions methods of production and ways of rethinking the modes of delivery of architecture, as was suggested by Kieran Timberlake in their 2004 Refabricating Architecture, to take advantage of the way in which alternate domains have conceived of production and not rely solely on those modes that are most central to the way we conceive of architecture. To approach production systemically while imagining unique spatial outcomes. And to conceptualize the ways in which new technologies can take advantage and can participate within these ecologies, transforming systems of environmental pressure and the possibility of harvesting the environment's products as a means of producing domestic space. Those conceptual frameworks translate very specifically to the way we conceive of the physical material of the building envelope as well, where we conceive of the envelope not as a static and weighty separation between interior and exterior, but as a dynamic system that is at once responding to the surrounding environment and also responding directly to the demands of human occupation. For us, systems programming is as central in the act of architecture as conceiving of form and material, but also is the way of conceiving of the design of human interface with these technologies and the notion that these technologies are not simply servicing the optimization of energy demand, but rather transforming the way we conceive of our interface with the exterior world. This extends to a series of what we're referring to as responsive envelopes. And I'll just show a couple of short slides of some recent work. The Stratus project is a prototype envelope that is conceived of as a thick kinetic sensing environment capable of responding to human occupation and volatile air quality conditions. It constitutes a kind of infrastructure of a loose tensegrity structural framework, distributed sensing, and actuation that responds in real time kinetically to transformations within the environment, both modifying itself in order to produce greater volumes of fresh air within a space as occupancy increases, but also in dynamic and real-time response to human engagement with that system. Resonant Chamber utilizes origami-based geometries as a means to produce kinetic and responsive acoustic environments. The notion that the acoustic qualities of a space can again respond in real time to particular sonic demands, changes in the relationship between participant and performer, and this concept that robotics might extend into the domain of architecture, not simply as mechanical systems, but integrated directly within the material of surface and the thickness of envelope, fundamentally transforming the way both absorption, reflection, and electroacoustic amplification might be able to produce new environments. These projects, in some way, are really the subject of a different kind of lecture, but I was interested specifically, since we were speaking at an institution of public education, to introduce some brief glimpses into the ways in which this concept of the ecological that we'll focus on this evening extends into other territories of design consideration. Tonight we'll focus on one body of work in some depth, the work that is on view at the Centre de Design, entitled Infra-Ecology Urbanism. This is not a single project, but rather a multi-year research effort involving several strands of research and design that converge on regionally scaled considerations and diverge towards other possibilities and trajectories. Fragments of the work during that period of development have been published in a range of familiar disciplinary contexts, and the opportunity to show here at UQAM is the first instance in which the work has been assembled in a single totality. The entire body of work is situated within a critical analysis of the networked agents, flows, and ecologies within the Great Lakes megaregion. The design manifesto leverages the anticipated yield of near-future renewable energy towards alternate social ends and imagines how a reworking of infrastructural systems and a reimagining of political frameworks might impact the future of urban centers and peripheries. In this détournement, the highway's constituent DNA is retooled into an intelligent network of bundled modes of mobility, energy, and services tied to renewable energy development. The viaduct is networked with other local and international systems of conveyance, transit, and transport, forming an open and interconnected corridor that catalyzes environmental remediation and emerging industry sectors while staging a series of urban-scaled architectural artifacts. These artifacts are designed to organize and systematize flows and house new hybrid public megaregional institutions. So that's the short version, and we'll try to unpack it now over the next 40 minutes or so in a two-part discussion of the specific motivations and details of the thinking of the project. The prediction that 90% of the world's population will be living in cities by 2050 is now a familiar and prediction and a mantra almost, which is repeated at the front end of every discussion of contemporary urbanism. But most of these cities will not resemble dense urban centers like New York. In many parts of the world, the pattern of urbanization that has been proliferating often looks something more like this: the greater Tokyo area, which extends as a continuous urban territory for 13.5 square kilometers. Or this example in North America, the city of Phoenix, where we see the continuous horizontal proliferation of urbanism tied to the facilitation of the ubiquitous interstate highway system. So major urban centers are indeed densifying and expanding, but vast territories between and adjacent to these centers are also being urbanized, creating multi-centered continuous agglomerations or conurbations of built form, and their attendant infrastructural and logistic zones, accompanied by a range of aberrant constructed ecologies. This is a recently published statistic showing where specifically, the expected 10 million new arrivals to southern Ontario by 2030 are expected to live. And as you can see, even though the central city will gain a significant number of these inhabitants, the adjacent small-size and mid-sized cities are the ones that will experience the most explosive growth, producing a continuous urban fabric between a more increasingly continuous urban field. This pattern of urban formation, of polycentric continuous urbanization, was first identified by French geographer Jean Gottman in his 1961 book, Megalopolis. It is now more commonly referred to as the megaregion, and this has become a topic of research for a range of urban researchers, economists, and geographic institutes worldwide. It is a new and emergent urban type. The physical reality of the megaregion dissolves the traditional relationship of center and periphery. Metropolitan boundaries become increasingly fuzzy, and what manifests itself instead is a territory of variably constructed densities and intensities of activity, shaped primarily by the ad hoc forces of mobile capital, entrepreneurial economics, market development, services, logistics, information, and environmental management. Politics and governance become increasingly complicated as human, infrastructural, and economic networks defy and rewrite jurisdictional boundaries. North American megaregions are specifically characterized by the highly distributed network of highways and the diffuse, low-density post-war urbanism they have facilitated. Often denigrated as sprawl, this is in fact where the majority of the urban population in North America resides and the primary landscape of their experience. As early as 1967, Robert Smithson recognized this phenomena, asking, has Passaic replaced Rome as the eternal city? This is the central question, really, because the legacy of built form for any future manifestation of the North American city must fundamentally build upon that which already exists. The reality of urban structures and infrastructures is that they have an incredible inertia with respect to their built form. Globally, we continue to live in urban patterns and formations constructed by societies hundreds of years ago, and in some cases thousands. The objects, structures, property divisions, and ordinance of our current urbanism, though they have been hastily constructed, constitute the patterns and characteristics that will now form the basis of all future urban development. Further, we propose that by investigating what has been considered the back-of-house activities of cities and their support systems, their infrastructures, logistics, and ecologies, urban design could take a more active role in transforming the future of cities, settlement patterns, and metropolitan life. Of the emerging North American megaregions, the Great Lakes megaregion is the most populous and also the most geographically vast. It spans the national boundaries of the USA and Canada and includes a range of familiar cities that constitute the United States Rust Belt, reaching as far east as Montreal, but also inclusive of Buffalo, Toledo, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Columbus, as well as the larger centers of Chicago, Detroit, and Toronto. In our definition of the Great Lakes megaregion, we include both the population boundary defined by the Regional Planning Association in the United States and the watershed boundary as a single region. It is also a region that is growing in population. As I mentioned, Southern Ontario projects 30% growth, or 10 million people by 2030. And on the US side of the megaregion, planners project an overall projection for a population rise of 17%, despite our awareness of the depopulation of former US manufacturing cities. Design thinking at the scale of the megaregion necessitates a territorial consideration that defies historically established jurisdictional delineation and corresponding government bodies. Overlapping, but often incongruous with these, are physiological geographies: rivers, lakes, watersheds, protected resources. These typically encompass and often traverse multiple jurisdictional zones, requiring new forms of negotiation and collaboration on questions such as infrastructure, trade, labor, energy, and resources. Our approach to urban research operates within what can be termed the ecological paradigm, the idea of ecology that has come to dominate the conceptual frameworks not only of the sciences, but also fields such as economics, philosophy, politics, and the other humanities, as well as culture at large. In this most general sense, ecology might be defined as the study of relations between dynamic interacting agents in coevolution with their environment. In the development of our working methods, we are indebted to the thinking and ideas of the 20th century biologist and planner Patrick Geddes, who was the first to take concepts of ecology developed in biology into physical planning, as well as the work of Benton Mackay in the development of the Appalachian Trail, Buckminster Fuller's concept of the world game, John McHale's research statistics for that project, as well as his Future of the Future project, the landscape architect Ian McHarg's ecological method, and the recent writing on industrial and biotic ecologies from Canadian biologist James Kay. Our research involves the development of multiple geospatial cartographies that begin to assemble specific ecologies active within the region. We have termed these cartographies sheds, as, like a watershed, they define geospatial boundaries within which elements of a particular system retain a high degree of interconnectedness and interdependency, and those interactions can be understood through the frameworks of hierarchically organized nested systems that operate through the self-organizational principles of complexity. These sheds are developed through the combination of information from multiple sources and data sets, often involving our own data acquisition, and then assembled through GIS-based mappings and data management visualization techniques. The approach prioritizes a combinatory network perspective that has the capacity to simultaneously consider structures, infrastructures, geographies, and flows as codependent agents in shaping landscapes that figure the future of urbanization. The research assembles 4 types of sheds: mobility sheds, economy sheds, environment sheds, and energy sheds. Each shed describes a territory that spatializes not only the material ecologies of its flows and exchanges, but also begins to reveal critical nodes and synergies within these networks. This image on the wall, that is also part of the primary kind of organizational panel in the exhibition, conflates and assembles the sum of these sheds into a single dynamic representation of the region. The ubiquity of road-based vehicles, coupled with the granularity and fidelity of North American road networks, have privileged the automobile as a means of commuter mobility and have facilitated a highly distributed pattern of settlement across the megaregion. Studies of post-war urban growth indicate that cities in North America have consistently grown towards major highways as, far more than rail, these have become the primary means of mobility for commuters. While new communications networks such as teleconferencing and the World Wide Web promise to produce a reduced demand for mobility, actual data reveals that immense demand for the infrastructural systems that support the movement of people. And while vehicle travel is expected to continue to increase in North America, a 400% increase in air travel constitutes a radical transformation in the demand for high-speed mobility, particularly between short-length flights. Our shed cartographies begin to reveal existing patterns within the megaregion and the emerging conditions that will parallel these demands for mobility. The cargo shed depicts movements of goods throughout the region by transportation mode and spatialized as volumetric flows along the rail, highway, air, and marine freight conduits. Daily, over $900 million worth of goods, or 25% of bilateral trade, crosses the U.S.-Ontario border via the highway system. According to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, truck-borne freight will double by 2035. The commodity shed serves to underscore the degree of economic interdependency that exists between major metropolitan areas of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, Toronto, and Montreal. While the region's global exports form a significant portion of the relative national GDP of both the US and Canada, as you can see, exchanges within the region constitute a substantive economy. In this shed mapping, flows of goods are represented as dimensional vectors divorced from the physical infrastructures that convey them. We also choose to focus on several significant emerging industry sectors throughout the megaregion, spatializing their various ecologies. The agri-shed spatializes the contemporary agro-industrial economy, both in terms of primary agricultural land cover by crop and the specific geographic sites of secondary processing centers of note. The tech shed identifies an ecology of industries, institutions, and funding agencies that either contribute to or take advantage of new developments in technology and that strategically leverage the potential of the megaregion's manufacturing inheritance. These industries include the development and manufacture of wind turbines, photovoltaic cells, lithium-ion batteries, next-generational mobility, and biotechnologies. This set of cascading networks describes an emergent system of economic potential, requiring a highly educated workforce whose expectations regarding quality of life demands new forms of civic participation. The Medished maps an ecology of production and exchange of emerging industries linked to the medical provision systems within the megaregion. This reveals itself to be a complex and interwoven network of health services delivery, pharmaceutical and biotechnological research, production, and distribution. Within the context of the highly developed economy that defines the GLM, leisure activities occupy a substantial portion of the lives of its citizens. Collective events distributed between specific venues across the region constitute a significantly driver of both intra-regional and extra-regional touristic transportation and economic flows. The EnviroShed describes the interconnected biotic ecologies that comprise the region, as well as the distribution of environmental hazards that pressurize these systems. While it is widely understood that the Great Lakes watershed is a primary environmental agent, this mapping incorporates the description of airborne and subsurficial agents that influence its ecological systems. The PowerShed conflates the sites and current output of coal, hydro, natural gas, and nuclear fuel for electrical production with the geography of mines, seams, rivers, and deep water cooling that facilitate each production process. While the other shed mappings demonstrate a regional interconnectedness relative to existing political boundaries, this shed illuminates fundamental differences in geology, energy policy, practice, and implementation between the US and Canada. Whereas US electricity production is dominated by coal and access to the seams south of this region, Canadian production is dominated by hydroelectrical generation, harnessing the power of the many rivers that drain south into the basin. Crude oil is currently the basis of 94% of transportation fuel. So you can see the problem between the anticipated demand in mobility from a few slides ago and the slide where we can see forecast the demise of cheap and plentiful single-sourced hydrocarbon-based fuel. We are about to enter into what is often referred to as a post-carbon era, where our energy sources will need to shift away from fossil fuels and will likely comprise a blended matrix of fuel types and production modes, with renewable energies expected to play a significant role in meeting that demand. The emerging landscapes that will accompany this post-carbon transformation will include an escalating reliance on renewable energies. The GLM territorializes significant amounts of renewable energies, or rather renewable energy resources. The potential shed spatializes the renewable resource capacities of wind, solar, untyped hydropower, and biomass conversion towards electrical production. Offshore wind power capacity in the Great Lakes region is estimated at approximately 320 gigawatts and is the region's most significant renewable energy resource. If fully exploited, this resource could deliver 25% of the power needs of the United States existing and would constitute a significant intra-regional export. However, its development demands more reciprocal international agreements between countries on energy policy, resource use, and environmental impact. In 2009, the province of Ontario legislated Bill 150, also known as the Green Energy Act, which includes an aggressive renewable energy feed-in tariff plan for both large and small-scale producers, with an overall aim to accelerate a distributed energy supply for the province. Within the last 3 years, this bill has transformed the landscape of southern Ontario, now beginning to resemble parts of northern Europe, with 1,500 megawatts of land-based wind farms installed as of September this year, and an additional 1,900 megawatts in development, along with 500 megawatts of photovoltaics installations currently approved. We argue that the shift to renewable energies in the Great Lakes megaregion does not only need to be about transforming the electricity supply system. By thinking about the design of new energy systems as part of an ecosystem that includes the future of mobility, the future of urban settlement, and the health of biotic systems, we propose that we may be able to anticipate far more socially productive repercussions on the shape of urban geographies, human activities, and biological resources within the region.
I'm going to take it from here. Okay, so within the situation that Jeff just described, we propose a point of leverage. So what if the potential yield from renewable energy sources could be harnessed not for maximum private profit, but in service of a retooling of current urban and political conditions within the megaregion? So we tried to, the speculative project was a testing of this proposition through a kind of scenario planning. And so in this scenario, we imagine a new coalition for the governance of the Great Lakes megaregion might be formed. And this is actually not that far out a speculation. Since 2008, we have had the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Water Resources Compact, which is a binational agreement between the states and provinces that border the waterways, so they can come to agreements on major water resource development questions. So the proposed mega-regional governance coalition would not only collaborate on issues such as water quality, pollution, and environmental remediation, but would also be charged with managing and directing the profits from renewable energy towards a new public infrastructural network. This new network would then serve the entire binational region and would also catalyze the development of new industries that can take advantage of regional synergies. And to achieve this, we looked not only at the current energy network, but to the physical infrastructure that, as Jeff mentioned, has been instrumental in structuring virtually all settlement patterns in North America since the 1950s. And this is the highway. Now, the highway is a brilliantly simple system, and its simplicity has been the reason why it's been quite successful and so ubiquitous. It's a singular asphalt surface that can go anywhere and that allows one mode of access and interface, and that is tire-based vehicles that can travel approximately 100 kilometers an hour, or sometimes faster, but a lot of times also slower. As Keller Easterling has said, the highway is a dumb system. It's kind of everyone on at the same time in the same space. And what is more, the current system of North American highways was mostly constructed in the 1950s. And here's an image of the inauguration, the inaugural ceremony of I-94 in Wisconsin, with Miss Concrete and Miss Blacktop gracing the party. But sadly, the concrete and the blacktop and the rest of the structures are pretty much at the end of their service life. And throughout most of North America, there's a kind of massive need for infrastructural repairs, which also allows an opportunity for rethinking what the highway does. In the Great Lakes megaregion, Ontario's Highway 401 holds the dubious honor of being North America's busiest highway and one of the busiest in the world. There's a kind commercial vehicles per day, and traffic congestion and delays on the 401 are so severe that it is estimated to cost over $5 billion in lost GDP every year. Our studies in complex systems dynamics have kind of indicated that due to the interconnected nature of infrastructure ecologies, small-scale adjustments in technology, new performative or typological constructs, or a reorganization of elements, fittings, or switches might have vast repercussions in the mechanics of the entire system and could produce transformations perhaps even more effectively and ubiquitously than large-scale replanning. So the project begins with a simple intervention into the system and its goals, which starts to have a series of cascading effects throughout the region. The proposal begins with a restructuring of the highway's constituent DNA from a simple single-purpose single-axis surface to an intelligent network of bundled modes of mobility that can provide access for multiple vehicle types, conveyances, and speeds. So besides cars and trucks, the conduit will carry renewable grid-tied elevated high-speed rail, renewable power transmission, high-capacity data transmission, fresh water supply and waste, and it would all be constructed within the right-of-way of the current system. So then the connection of the cities from Milwaukee to Montreal through high-speed rail, see if I can get this play, would effectively collapse time-space within the region, far more, for more citizens than the current air and vehicle systems allow. However, in this proposal, the grid-tied rail is not the object, but it's actually a point of opportunity for us to envision a new possibility for the future, future urban and architectural development. This is really not a new idea within the history of architecture. There has been an ongoing project of utopian urban visions associated with new technologies for mobility, such as Norman Bell Getty's, on your left, famous Futurama exhibit for GM in the 1939 World's Fair, and Jeffrey Jellicoe's Motopia of around the same time. However, we're much more interested in recuperating a specific strand of utopias that emerged during the post-war period. And these we would describe as through the term fragmentary utopias. Prominent in the 1960s and 70s, these utopias do not imagine a distant, ideal, totalizing, formal, social, and moral future, nor do they offer a parallel yet disengaged reality as many kind of typical utopias did. Instead, they are seriously explored as historically probable alternatives for possible future worlds. And I'm just going to briefly introduce some of these influences on the work. So first is Allison and Peter Smithson's 1957 Hauptstadt Berlin competition entry, which was positioned against the functionalist visions emerging from adherence to the Athens Charter and the tabula rasa schemes of urban reconstruction promoted by the second generation of modernists. The proposal by the Smithsons envisions an elevated platform net that weaves through the war-ravaged urban fabric of Berlin, creating a physical and social scaffold for redevelopment. And according to the Smithsons, this proposal would try to overcome social alienation through the physical mobility and access network and through engagement with the existing urban context. Second, we look to British architect and visionary Cedric Price and his proposal for the Potteries Think Belt in England's post-industrial area of North Stratfordshire. Price was concerned with the lack of adaptation and institutional learning that he was seeing at the time, declaring that universities had become exclusive enclaves that provided knowledge for only a select few, and that this knowledge was also out of date with changing technologies and industries. He proposed to leverage the existing infrastructural and mobility infrastructure within the area to create a mobile, adaptable, and openly conceived public university for new technology education and applied research. And central to Price's argument was that in order to transform education, it was necessary to address the spatial apparatus of education as opposed to just focusing on content and those who delivered it. So Price's mobile transformable campus network was made accessible through the existing rail infrastructure, and he imagined it would also transform the Potteries region itself into an integrated and interactive landscape that would develop new formats of think tank research and inclusive higher education available to the working classes. And finally, we look to the 1977 proposal called Berlin, a Green Archipelago, proposed by O.M. Ungers and his team, which at the time included a guy named Rem Koolhaas. In this proposal, a future Berlin would operate through a series of urban artifacts and coalesce legible built form, cultural and political practices interconnected through infrastructures. And these urban artifacts were set within a diffuse and at the time shrinking urban fabric, which Ungers referred to as a green sea, and hence the term green archipelago. And this green sea would consist of the informal metabolic urban processes that could constitute anything from agricultural fields to hybrid natures to suburban zones and even drive-in theaters. And to Ungers, this field constituted the highly charged nothingness of the city that the artifacts would organize. And so we're interested in these projects as they propose urban architectural and social visions of a grand scale, but ones that are at the same time incomplete and anticipatory. And they are interconnected with their surroundings, be they physical, economic, biotic, social, and political. And they also establish a clear agency of urban architecture. Our project is conceived of as a contemporary fragmentary utopia. So the new bundled energy and mobility viaduct is networked with other local and international systems of conveyance, transit, and transport. And it is also porous to biotic systems, catalyzing landscape remediation operations along its length. It forms an open corridor, interconnected and accessible to multiple populations, and also becomes a platform from which a new social can be enacted through the confrontation and negotiations of individuals in public. Along the length of the system, we also identify sites of highway interchange as places where these new developments can be implemented. So the highway is seen not only as a space of flow overloaded with vehicles, but also a physical space of opportunity, and this opportunity lies in its territorialization of variable surface infrastructure morphologies. And a typology native to the highway is that of the interchange, designed to transition orientation and velocity between infrastructural vectors. And we undertook a systematic study of each unique form of interchange along the conduit that we were working with, and looked at it as a system of not only of rules driven by transportation engineering and inflected by local conditions, but also by the fact that each interchange orphans an average of 18 hectares of surface land in variable and idiosyncratic formats. So these sites of interchange hold enormous potential for future developments as expanding urbanizations attempt to absorb the highway in their form, since they are owned also by a singular infrastructure authority and therefore can be developed by a single entity in agreement with the mega-regional governance coalition. And beyond points of transfer and refueling, these sites will house the new mega-regional institutions for citizens of the region, as well as other programs responding to local stakeholders. Each interchange is then both isolated and embedded within its immediate context. So while it is networked with other systems, each interchange development makes itself distinct as an urban artifact, and in this way maintains its architectural legibility and representational agency. And so while the project imagines that there would be a series of interchanges of various scales and complexity along, at multiple points along the line, in the speculative work, we have developed three major interchanges in detail, which are at Detroit, Windsor, Chicago, and Toronto. And the program form and scope of the development emerges from research into the various actors, forces, and forms that condition each interchange location. So as we start to kind of zoom into the nodal interchange locations, we return to mapping analysis to explore how the more localized networks, first cartographically through geospatial mappings, and here are the networks at play for the interchange at the Detroit-Windsor crossing. And then we started to look at the networks relationally through what we call actor network drawings. And the development of these drawings is based in actor network theory, which explores socially embedded networks of human and non-human agents. And these drawings gather and visualize the connections and networks between agents such as legislation, organizations, institutions, individuals, and specific sites attendant to the charge zone of each location. And so kind of zooming in for the actor network for the Detroit-Windsor node, we assembled a series of potential stakeholders such as the International Joint Commission, the Intermodal Freight Terminal, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, the Urban Watershed Environmental Research Group, and the Community Action for a Renewed Environment, and local community action groups that would all coalesce around major infrastructural works in that area, and whose sometimes competing agendas would need to be negotiated through the development. We also look more specifically at local codes. I know these are hard to read at this scale, and pieces of legislature that can provide both insight and opportunity for major developments. So again, at Detroit-Windsor, a number of pieces of legislature, such as NAFTA, the Water Energy Nexus, the Great Lakes Compact, have laid the ground for developments in binational collaboration on resource and environmental issues, as well as trade. And more recently, the multinational bridge and crossing agreements have anticipated a major new piece of infrastructure to be built at that site, which is a new bridge proposed at the Detroit-Windsor border, and maybe some of you have heard about that in the news. This then becomes the site of opportunity for the next scale of development. And before I'm going into the detailed design, I'm going to kind of diverge once more and situate, just to situate the formal and spatial development of the nodes within another chapter of the history of the discipline, and that is that of the megastructure. And megastructures were first kind of identified by Maki in 1964. And a megastructure can be defined as a large frame in which all of the functions of a city or part of a city are housed. And in a sense, it becomes a kind of man-made feature of the landscape. And megastructures are often referred to as a city within a city. And they combine, they're interesting to us because they combine infrastructures and multiple urban programs within a single composition. And part of our research included a systematic inventory of constructed megastructures from Eurolille to the Barbican in London, to your own megastructure here, the Place Bonaventure in Montreal, and La Défense in Paris, and there's several more at the exhibition. And for each one, we analyzed a mix of program forms and as well as transit connections. We also were interested in the vast interior worlds that are developed by these megaforms. And the kind of large urban interior is something that emerges as a type in the 20th century as transit, commerce, and large-scale assembly take on the scale of the multitude. And this is Saarinen's JFK terminal, which we find extremely compelling. And these large urban interiors are layered, complex spaces that often extend beyond peripheral vision. But like public squares of the traditional cities, they exist in between multiple urban programs operating to organize, gather, and orient publics. In the interior, the possibility of vertical extension with multiple interconnected platforms and passages offers other possibilities for appearance and interaction. And this is, the text is hard to read, but this is Berlin, the Berlin Central Station. While these new metropolitan spaces are often characterized by private as opposed to state ownership, and thereby heavily critiqued by proponents of public space relative to our traditional understanding of the public square or street, within the post-urban territory, we argue that these privately owned spaces of publicness might avail the most plausible forms for collective expression. So now I'm going to just go back to the design proposals. The first node we developed is strategically located at the US-Canada border between Detroit and Windsor, roughly located where the new bridge is currently planned. We call this project the Crossing, and it takes the form of a 2.4-kilometer long inhabited bridge spanning the Detroit River. As a megastructure, it recalls inhabited bridges such as the Ponte Vecchio to your left and London's Old London Bridge, which is no longer in existence. The crossing enters the USA in a zone of heavy industry adjacent to the infamous Zug Island, which is this piece of land right here, a private island dedicated entirely to steel manufacturing. This is a highly polluted part of the city, and there are multiple Superfund sites along the banks of the Detroit River that will be mobilized once ground is broken for constructing the bridge. As site remediation activities mobilize the contaminated land, we can anticipate a future urban development consisting of a finer grained block development for new occupations and the provision of public access to the waterfront. On the Windsor side is an expanded free trade zone, container port, and associated facilities which take advantage of the water-based freight capacity of the Great Lakes in connection to the St. Lawrence Seaway. And across the river, in Detroit, there's a staging area for the deployment of offshore wind turbines, which now form a major part of the mega-regional economy. The new bridge is completely accessible for the public through the regional maglev, which stops at its center. The entire space of the bridge is a free zone where national citizenship and hence certain conditions of inclusion and exclusion are suspended. At the Detroit end of the bridge, the kind of courtyard with a plinth is a specialized medical treatment center, which offers medical, pharmaceutical, and biotechnology research, and as well other research programs engaging questions of energy resources, aquatic and biotic systems, and the such are also housed in the body of the bridge. In resistance to the privatization and for-profit entrepreneurialism of governance and environmental stewardship, the crossing houses the Center for Great Lakes Governance, which aims to reestablish politics through the confrontation and negotiation of individuals and authorities in the newly formed public forum, which is located at the midpoint of the bridge and virtually at the inscribed geopolitical border. So this is sorry, I jumped forward too fast. But this is the Center for Great Lakes Governance, and then a few other images of the development. This consists of a collection of assembly halls and attendant hotel and support programs where representatives of the over 56,000 Great Lakes mega-regional citizens convene to determine policy and action on matters concerning the shared renewable energy system, infrastructure, water, environmental protection, regional labor, transport and trade, and other matters that require cross-border collaborative decision-making and new policy formats. And the crossing is conceived of as a space accessible equally to all citizens of both countries, and it's also accessible via private vehicle, high-speed rail, transit, and pedestrian access. But as a megastructure, it places in symbolic and operational relation multiple publics and multivalent subjectivities within the region. The project both smooths out flows, but also kind of complicates them, redrawing and questioning where borders exist, juxtaposing spaces of flows with spaces of place, and agglomerating public programs along a line of mobility, identifying the site of the border itself as a space of access as well as of politics. The next nodal development takes place in Chicago. Located in a linear swath along the axis of Congress Parkway, which is right along here, the central axis of the 1909 Burnham Plan, and this axis stretches all the way from Lake Michigan through the Circle Interchange, which is right here, and the UIC campus right here. This is an assembly of urban islands that are geographically central, yet morphologically peripheral to the city. There are multiple parcels along this length, this urban transect, that are dedicated to large-scale infrastructure, parking, and logistics. And the site is completely hostile to pedestrians and creates a functional and phenomenal threshold within the city of Chicago. In Chicago, we looked at the precedent of Mises' IIT campus plan, which architect and Dean of Rice University, Sarah Whiting, describes as a bas-relief urbanism, both figural and abstract, that creates an open field eroded at its edges, yet manages to maintain a sense of a clear urban precinct. The architectural form of the nodal development in Chicago, which we call the Exchange, is rhizomic. It weaves through the built and void spaces of the city to interconnect a series of entry points through the common urban fabric and pedestrian access, which include the new maglev terminal stop at the Circle Interchange, the bus terminal, Union Station, which is just over here, LaSalle Station, and a new ferry port for regional lake travel that are all interconnected through pedestrian and passenger links. In resistance to the monopolization of market for hegemonic gain and the systematic privatization of the city and its institutions, as well as in resistance to the exploitation of common water resources by the city, and specifically in the case of Chicago, the infamous sanitary and ship canal, the Chicago Exchange forges a spine of free market exchange, open intellectual exchange, and biotic exchange between urban and environmental systems. And among these are new housing developments that bring pedestrian life to this part of the city, as well as a network of urban parks. And you can see the kind of the different spaces along this spine. And linear planted zones that process rainwater, as well as providing recreation for inhabitants. This is a kind of mongrel urban architecture of competing concerns that integrates the space of the market with new forms of ecological entrepreneurship, networks of common space, and supports multiple forms of open exchange and industry development along its length, such as a complex for global freshwater futures above LaSalle Street, located beside the Chicago Stock Exchange, and then a kind of proposed development for the old post office site, which becomes a micro-business incubator and entrepreneurship with a large marketplace at street level. The new maglev station above the interchange has a series of interconnected spaces that connect to a university commons for the University of Illinois at Chicago, and also serves as a pedestrian passage to link the university back to the city and its citizens. And the third node that is developed in detail is located within the massive intersection of the 401 and 427 highways, adjacent to Toronto's Pearson International Airport. We call this node the Gateway, and it is designed as a kind of monumental landscape, a modern acropolis constructed not for defense, but for assemblage. So the Gateway is conceived of as a port of arrival, as well as a space of public apprehension, where the social questions of inclusion and exclusion are conflated in one heterotopic complex. And so here, new immigrants, who primarily in Canada arrive, or in Ontario arrive at Pearson, mix with current residents and visitors from the mega region. Networked with the surroundings via the air rail link, public transportation, and the new, as well as the maglev, private last mile, hybrid fueled vehicles, and bicycle access from the adjacent ravine system. This gateway draws not only the vast populations of the mega region, but also the highly diverse populations which have come to characterize the city of Greater Toronto. So it's a place of collective citizenship, physical and spiritual life. So contained within this megastructure are assembly halls, a whole series of assembly halls and sports facilities, totaling over 200,000 seats. Several of them are Olympic-scaled stadia, rinks, and athletic facilities, while others accommodate congregation for religious sects that are represented in the megaregion. And this kind of aggregation of major spaces of gathering and sports perhaps might remind one of Piranesi's fictional plan of the Campo Marzio, which was a territory colonized entirely by public monuments. The space of theaters and temples acts as a crucible from which a sense of publicness and collective can emerge through both social confrontation and play. So along with the spaces of gathering, there are research spaces for collaboration across various universities, government agencies, and emerging industry sectors. And of particular significance is the research currently underway into new methods of food production, agricultural science, and kinetic medicine and nutrition. And also, we imagine that a new joint US-Canadian high-performance training center for athletes is also related here, housed here, where athletes can train, stay in temporary accommodations, and utilize the various resources. The complex, we imagine, becomes a host for international competitions, gatherings, and conferences due to the adjacency of the significant modes of both regional, local, and international travel. And the Great Arrival Hall, and this is an image inside where we have the maglev, the swimming complex, but also these kind of massive gathering spaces and conference spaces around the perimeter, becomes a kind of mixing chamber where residents confront the space between new ideals and established ones. And so as a project, this body of work speculates on the potential of architecture not only to engage urban processes such as infrastructure, capital, logistics, environmental remediation, and governance, but also for the potential of urban forum to structure experience and inform negotiation at the scale of the megaregion. And as a way of concluding, I just want to say a couple of words about the exhibition at the Centre de Design, which hopefully most of you have already visited, and if not, hopefully you will visit. The organization of the exhibition is organized as a territory. And so the intention is that in both its form and its content, it posits an approach to urban design that is not about a singular vision or a grand scheme. And so rather what is proposed by its organization is an assemblage of reciprocal relations nested at the micro and macro scales of both time and space. And so like this presentation, the exhibition covers a very diverse ground that includes the cartographies, analyses, design, but also historical research, writing, and photographs, and large-scale physical models. And the intention of the exhibition is that they are all spatially arrayed so that multiple interrelations, scales, and connections can be made visible and apprehensible from multiple viewpoints and routes. And so, like the project, it is intentionally incomplete and expectant. And so before we take questions, again, I'd like to thank all of the collaborators who've been involved in producing this work, which has been going on for several years, and specifically in the last 8 months in producing this exhibition, as well as to the Social Sciences and Research Council of Canada, the University of Michigan Office of the Vice President of Research, and Ryerson University, who've helped fund this work. Okay, thank you.
So we're not sure if there's any questions, but if there were, we would be happy to respond to them, whether in the dark or in the light.
Extraordinary imagination
As usual, my colleague from Toronto has conceived of a kind of question that emerges as a monologue, becomes a compliment, transforms quickly into a kind of proposition that then swivels and becomes a kind of challenge. So, thanks, David. Sure, we could write a song about it. So I mean, I think that speculating on the specifics of the political realization of a kind of project like this is completely is a question we would completely sidestep. But I think central to the discussion of the necessity of conceiving of, within the complex systems of the project, the multiplicity of forms of governance, jurisdiction, and law is a kind of central theme in a complex systems approach to thinking about design. You know, if you think about Donella Meadows' 1967 text from the Whole Earth Catalog, How to Intervene in a System, you know, she suggests that central to attempting to operate in that system is the capacity to recognize the fullness and completeness of the system itself, the physical and non-physical structures and agents that comprise the interactions between that system, but perhaps most importantly, the kind of non-visible codes by which the system does the work that it does. And so I think this, you know, relative to this drawing, I think this question of the agency of various political jurisdictions relative to any aspect of the kind of various ecologies we're examining can't be underestimated. First, in the capacity to impact any situation, but also as a consideration that warrants the attention of design. And you know, I think that that's a kind of central underlying issue that demands attention, at least in the work of our efforts on this project, even though our actions are not necessarily robust at the level of politics. It's not the arena in which we are primarily engaged, but nonetheless the kind of necessity of design activity and discourse to engage agents of political action is fundamental. And certainly if we imagine the audiences for this work, and we, you know, optimistically imagine they are also multiple, one of the primary audiences that we're interested in engaging is that of the empowered political.
Thanks for bringing the Great Lakes down the river and making us think about this extraordinary region. You're very brave. Now, I'd like to ask you two questions. Since the 70s, there's been a profound, marked conservative shift in politics. It started in Chile, then Great Britain, United States, Canada, and then after '89, everywhere else. And globalization went on, the deregulation, et cetera, which hit the Detroit, Pittsburgh, became a new concept. Rust Belt, the brown fields that we didn't exist before. And income inequality has increased enormously. So have you taken this into account? Question number one. And the new, or the governing coalition, international governing coalition that you evoke, who's going to be in it? And it's going to be for whom? Especially when I'm looking up at the map, and Indiana, which is, I don't know, for how many years it's become a right-to-work state, and most recently, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. You know, the current owners of the brand name, a century later, went back on Lafayette's innovations. You know, I think it was the Republican Party of Wisconsin that introduced many progressive reforms a century ago now. In a sense, it's the same question. And in some respect, and I'm not trying to be flattering in order to kick you. You have some marvelously inventive things that cover the bridge. But who's going to be going into that medical center? But what can you do? Can you address that question or begin to address it? Yeah. Thanks.
We have to cuddle to get this to the microphone. There are several ways to respond to that question, and I think oh, there we go. Yeah, okay. There's several ways to respond to that question, and in a way, I think they go to the core of a lot of things that we've been thinking about recently as we've been working through this project. The first thing is, okay, I'm going to go back into architectural history for a moment. And I'm going to talk about a project that Super Studio did in the early 1970s, where they designed a series of dystopian cities. I think it was 7 of them, is that right? David, do you remember? And in connection with each of these dystopian cities, one of them, for example, was gigantic structure comprised of small cubes in which a person is born, lives their entire life, connected to machines that draw out fluids and add other fluids and so on. And at a certain point, the cube crushes and the body is expelled and another one comes in, right? So that's the nature of these dystopian cities. And at the end, and then there's a long, well, not that long, but there's a very elegant text that describes each city. And at the end of the text, they say, Super Studio says, by the way, if you haven't noticed, all of these cities exist already. These are just depictions of places that already exist in our lives. Okay? Maybe extensions or radicalizations of them or exaggerations, but they are places that already exist. To a certain extent, I think that's what we're doing here. Kathy alluded to the fact that the Great Lakes as a water system can't be managed unless there is a bilateral organization that operates between the Canadian and US governments in order to manage that system. So this is already the foundation, if you like, of this Great Lakes Government Coalition, right? It's not necessarily the case that we're proposing Canada and the US go away. What we're saying is that there are a number of systems of geological scope, geographical scope, involving energy transfer, involving all of these systems, mobility and so on, that require, and in some cases already have, governance systems of their own. So one of the questions for us becomes, how does that get represented in architecture? What is architecture's role in producing a space in which this happens? Right, so in a way, it's a very simple question that I don't know if I've answered your question, in fact, but that's how I would respond. Jeff's going to respond differently.
Yes, I'm going to say something, and now for something completely different, which is in fact an earnest attempt to address the two issues that I think are prioritized in your question. One has to do with the undeniably dominant, conservative, self-interested ethos that governs the positions of power across North American democratic states. And the second has to do with what format, in what format and to what end do gestures towards a mega-regional public, how are these positioned? And I think it's difficult to be responsible for the entire universal context that one operates in when one engages broadly. However, I think there's some very interesting patterns emerging. Certainly where we reside at the moment, we reside in a tiny liberal intellectual enclave in a city called Ann Arbor in Michigan, a kind of very unique moment, a bubble, some of my colleagues refer to it, within a highly conservative context. And one of the most interesting things we've been looking at recently are a series of initiatives around the transformation of future emerging economic platforms, future models of educational delivery, and the reconceptualization of opportunities for access to education, information, and advantage that are being supported primarily by agents which you would most likely associate with the most conservative sources of power in that region. And so, how could this be, one might ask? And the primary drivers are self-interest, actually. At the moment, for example, in Michigan, 4,000 unfilled, highly skilled engineering jobs exist. Now, this is a very difficult thing to imagine in a context where you have one of the most advanced manufacturing industries in the world still, despite the downturn in the U.S. automotive industry. And there are certain kinds of pressures that I would speculate where, like the possibilities of certain excesses or conditions that are produced within infrastructural procedures, culturally, we are producing products, cultural waste products that are actually stifling the possibility of society at large to continue to benefit at the expense of all other members disenfranchised by the system. So this is a very interesting question. And I just point to those local moments of a particular set of projects like Next Energy and a range of educational initiatives that are being supported by major corporate interests in that state as a kind of moment where actually self-interest in continuing success in a global arena of competition is precisely the kind of lever that might motivate conceptually otherwise resistant forces that would be necessary to align with collective vision for a region. And then within the project, the question of have we considered for whom and how, I mean, I think that that's kind of self-explicit in the project, but one of the concepts that we've been struggling with respect to social equity has to do with the, at a fundamental level in terms of transportation, has to do with the concept of access. I have a good colleague, Jonathan Levine, an expert in transportation policy and social research at the University of Michigan, who argues that the challenge in a contemporary moment where we're thinking about how to provide sustainable transportation has to fundamentally hinge on the question of the maximum provision of access for the most number of people to the thing which they desire, as opposed to, let's say, an accounting process of minimizing the number of BTUs that the collective travel dimensions assemble as a kind of sum of energy demand impact. And I think that's a really kind of interesting question for us to think about, not solely in the provision of transportation to a public, increasingly perhaps conceiving of itself as mega-regional in nature, but rather as a fundamental condition for all design to consider how are we conceiving of this concept of access and to what. So
Bonsoir. Je voulais féliciter Monsieur Bergman. Congratulations for bringing this event it's great to have this link to, you know, along the St. Lawrence, where I think we're linked naturally from a river perspective. It's great to see your work. It's very motivating, inspiring. Thank you again to Mr. Bergman. I'm curious about a couple of points. Obviously, we are linked, you know, historically through, you know, through the explorers of Cadillac, for instance, heading from Montreal to Detroit area, Cavalier de la Salle to Chicago area. I was curious, so I think it's a natural thing that we go up and down the river to talk about our future and how to develop, you know, some connections, natural connections. So I think that's quite positive. I was curious about a couple of points in regards with the I enjoy your titillating aspects to the political points about the border between Detroit and Windsor. You know, I think it's an interesting point about where the border is, and you know, is it in the middle of the river, and so on and so forth. These questions, I think, are you know, quite interesting for sure, and titillating, I think, in a political arena as we you know, look at our relationship between the U.S. and Canada. I was curious about specifically the water quality in the river that flows around that part. You know, is it swimmable? What is the? Is there a beach possibility to develop a beach somewhere down there, or you know, also? Okay, I guess that's it. So if you would like to talk about that, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd swim in it right now, but but actually, when you visit the site, and actually the site where the bridge is, it's there's actually quite a bit of recreation that goes on. There's a small community boat launch, and also members of the community actually fish right beside Zug Island, and it looks like they intend to eat that fish. So even though it's highly polluted, it still has a certain amount of public use, and as part of the proposal, kind of to us, right now the bridge that's being developed is in the way that the bridge agreement is operating. You know, they're building the bridge for trade, but they're not. There's nothing else that's happening. It's not catalyzing any other synergistic benefits to the community and to the cities. And so as part of the conviction of this work is that these kinds of major infrastructural developments should catalyze these should have these kind of other fallouts that benefit communities within their sites. So as part of the proposal, there is a kind of remediation project at the river. I haven't done the studies to know what it would take to make the Detroit River swimmable, especially close to Zug Island. But you know, but the idea is that the whole waterfront does get redeveloped as a public space. Because right now it's been heavily annexed by industry. It's except for in a couple of places on both Windsor and Detroit, it's really inaccessible, and that's the intention happening kind of upriver and kind of linking that public access even to the heritage of the industrial sites. I think is something that would hopefully be a kind of synergistic development with the project.
Yeah, congratulations for your refined work and your brilliant cybernetics. I think you are almost there. I mean, to get this built.
Oh yeah, yeah. But
we all know that this project of the high-speed train from Quebec to Windsor. There is a political lobby, an economical lobby. And of course, one would suggest you to go immediately into politics. But maybe you could hand this work over to activist groups so they can make a political strategy datascapes on it, how to break those interest groups.
Is that a question?
That doesn't sound like a question, it sounds like a plan. Anyway, maybe we'd say.
Thank you for reinforcing that architecture is in fact political action.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our work and for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Well, if there are no other questions, thank you for your assistance, and of course, at the end, for your marvelous presentation, because I already read all those texts, but it's very different when you present it verbally. Thank you.